The noose of silence tightened around Evelyn's throat as the Apache warrior led her by the reins into the dark canyon, the moon painting his bare chest in silver fire. The desert swallowed every sound except for the soft scuff of his moccasins and the restless snort of her mar. She had never seen eyes like his black, steady, unreadable yet filled with something she feared more than knives. Patience died at 30 years old. Evelyn thought her days of girlish fright had ended long ago. She had buried a husband, shouldered debts, fought off wolves from her livestock, and endured winters that froze the marrow of her bones. Fear had been replaced by hard practicality. Yet tonight, beneath the gaze of this silent warrior, her hands trembled in their bindings. The rope cut into her wrists, but the greater sting was in her chest, a wild confusion of dread and a heat she refused to name. The canyon walls rose like dark cathedral spires, trapping them in shadow. Stars burned cold above, so sharp they seemed to pierce the sky itself. The air smelled of sagebrush and smoke, and Evelyn's mind reeled with unanswered questions. Why had he spared her when others raided her homestead? Why was she, a white widow, still alive, still untouched when she had expected the end? When they reached a circle of rocks glowing with firelight, the warrior stopped. He untied her hands, yet the gesture brought no relief. Freedom under his watchful stare was no freedom at all. His shoulders glistened with sweat from the long ride, his long black hair loose, catching embers and strands of fire. A necklace of turquoise and bone hung against his chest, each piece clicking softly as he moved. Evelyn rubbed her sore wrists and dared to look at him directly. He was not as young as she'd first thought. His face bore scars faint, but written deep enough to tell of battles survived. His jaw was strong, his mouth firm, though when he finally spoke, his voice startled her more than his silence. "You will not fear me tonight," he said in accented English, his tone low and deliberate. "I'll be gentle." The word struck her harder than any threat. Fear would have been simple, familiar, easy to cling to. But gentleness? She had not been held gently since before her husband's death. The promise unsettled her, gnawed at her resolve, and left her heart pounding against her ribs. Evelyn tried to harden her voice. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, though the crack in her tone betrayed her unease. The warrior did not answer at once. He crouched by the fire, feeding it dry mesquite until the flames climbed higher, dancing gold against the canyon walls. He gestured for her to sit across from him. When she hesitated, his dark eyes lifted to hers, steady, not demanding, but carrying a weight that made her legs obey before her mind could object. "You are not prisoner," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the fire. "You are under my protection." The words made less sense than silence. Protection from what? From whom? The raid had taken her cattle, her supplies, and left her house smoldering. Protection had come too late. Unless he meant something else, something that would test every nerve in her body. Her heart ached with memories of her husband, Thomas, who had died 2 winters past in another raid. She remembered his rough hands, his quick laugh, the way his presence had steadied her. She had loved him, yes, but time had hardened her love into memory and memory into stone. And now this warrior, this stranger with scarred skin and unreadable eyes, threatened to chip away at that stone with nothing more than his quietness. She forced herself to meet his gaze again. The firelight caught in his eyes, making them glimmer like onyx warmed by flame. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that both carried wounds unseen. Evelyn clenched her hands into fists, trying to smother the strange pull inside her. She reminded herself of what the town preacher had once said: "Fear keeps you alive. Curiosity gets you killed." And yet, when the warrior spread a blanket of deerskin near the fire and gestured for her to rest, it wasn't fear that tightened Evelyn's chest. It was something far more dangerous, because even in the shadows of that canyon, She realized the truth death had not come for her tonight. Something far more uncertain had, and in that moment, Evelyn understood she stood on the edge of a fire that could consume her whole. The fire crackled low, its warmth seeping into the night air as Evelyn sat stiffly on the deerskin blanket. Her eyes darted to the warrior's silhouette, every flicker of flame painting his muscular frame in shifting gold and shadow. He had spoken so few words, yet the weight of them lingered. You are not prisoner. You are under my protection. Protection. The word grated in her ears. She did not ask for protection. She wanted her home, her animals, her quiet life back on the ranch. She wanted her husband's laughter, the steady thud of boots across the wooden floor, the smell of tobacco and coffee lingering in the air. All that was gone, snatched away in a haze of smoke and screams, and in its place sat the scarred warrior, as immovable as the canyon walls themselves. Evelyn's throat tightened. She could not cry not in front of him. Not now. He crouched across from her, silent, tending to the fire. Sparks rose like fireflies into the night sky, scattering among the stars. When he glanced up, their eyes met. His gaze held no cruelty, no lust, yet it pinned her all the same. He might as well have tied her hands again. Finally, he spoke. "Your name." The simple request startled her. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He repeated it slowly, his accent turning it into something new. "Evelyn." Something inside her shifted at the sound of her name in his mouth. She swallowed hard. "And yours?" For a long moment he stared into the fire, as though weighing whether she had earned the answer. Then he spoke. "Takoda, Takoda." The syllables rolled heavy, unfamiliar, yet strong. Evelyn found herself repeating it in her mind, holding on to it like a thread of understanding in a world that had unraveled. She drew her knees to her chest, hugging them tightly. "Why me?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Why bring me here? My ranch is ash, my life." Her voice broke despite her will. "Is gone." Takoda leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The firelight caught the sharp lines of his cheekbones, the faint scars along his jaw. "Because you still breathe," he said simply. "And breath means you still have something." His answer was maddening in its mystery. She clenched her fists, heat rising to her cheeks. Something? What could I possibly have left? Instead of answering, he reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a strip of dried meat. He placed it carefully on a flat stone near her and then leaned back, giving her space. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was provision. Evelyn stared at the food, her stomach knotting with hunger. She had eaten nothing since the raid. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, yet her body betrayed her. She took it in trembling fingers, biting into the tough flesh, tears stinging her eyes at the taste. As she chewed, she became aware of his steady gaze again. Not predatory, watchful, as though studying the strength of her spirit more than her body. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the night wind sighing through sagebrush. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "You spared me when you could have." "Ended me. Why?" Takoda's eyes softened, but his expression remained unreadable. "The desert takes enough without my help." Evelyn sat stunned. It was not the answer of a captor, nor of a man seeking conquest. It was the answer of someone who knew loss as intimately as she did. The canyon grew colder as the night deepened. Takoda shifted, spreading another blanket near the fire and gesturing for her to lie down. His words from earlier echoed again in her mind. "I'll be gentle." She hesitated, torn between mistrust and exhaustion. Her body screamed for rest, but her spirit bristled at surrender. Yet, as she lay down on the coarse deerskin, the fire's warmth at her back and Takoda's presence steady across from her, she realized something strange. For the first time since the raid, She did not feel alone, and that terrified her more than anything. Evelyn woke to the sound of horses snorting in the cool dawn. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and a faint chill crept through the canyon. She pushed herself up from the deerskin blanket, her muscles stiff, her dress wrinkled and stained with soot. For one disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then her eyes found Takoda. He was already awake, standing at the canyon's edge, his back to her. Shirtless still, his powerful shoulders gleamed with morning dew, his long black hair stirred by the desert wind. He looked as if he belonged to the land itself, stone, sun, and shadow fused into one. Evelyn's throat tightened. She told herself she should hate him. After all, his people had stormed her ranch, taken everything she had left. Yet when she studied him, standing so still and silent, she couldn't find hatred in her chest. Confusion, yes. Fear, yes. But hatred? It slipped through her grasp. Takoda turned, catching her gaze. He did not speak. Instead, he motioned toward a clay pot set near the ashes of the fire. Steam curled faintly from its rim. Evelyn hesitated, then crept forward and peered inside. Some kind of broth simmered, fragrant with herbs she couldn't name. Her stomach twisted in longing. "You should eat," Takoda said simply. His English was broken, yet careful, each word chosen like an arrow aimed at its mark. Evelyn sat, cradling the pot in her hands, sipping cautiously. The broth was earthy, rich, smoky. It spread warmth through her chest, and before she could stop herself, a sound escaped her lips, a sigh, soft but unmistakable. When she glanced up, Takoda was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Better," he murmured, almost to himself. The canyon seemed to grow brighter with the rising sun. Colors shifted across the stone-deep reds, ochres and golds, and birds wheeled high above. Evelyn set down the pot and drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You said I'm not a prisoner," she said. "Then what am I?" Takoda walked closer, stopping only a few feet away. The space between them felt charged, as if the air itself held its breath. "You are under my care," he answered. "My word keeps you safe, safe." The word struck Evelyn like an arrow. Her life had never been truly safe. Even before the raid, danger lingered in every shadow of the frontier: rattlesnakes, droughts, bandits, fever. Yet the way Takoda said it, with such unshakable certainty, made her wonder if he truly believed it. "You don't even know me," she whispered. His gaze softened, and for the first time she thought she saw something flicker in his dark eyes, something more than watchfulness. "I know loss," he said quietly. "I know what it makes of people." The words cut through her. She had not spoken Thomas's name in months, afraid that saying it aloud would shatter the fragile armor she had built around her heart. And here this warrior, this stranger, seemed to see the wound she had buried deep. Evelyn looked away, blinking hard. The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. It was the kind of silence that gave space, not demanded it. Takoda knelt and began to braid his horse's mane with quick, steady fingers. His long hair slipped forward as he worked, strands catching the morning light like threads of raven silk. Evelyn watched him in secret, drawn to the grace in his movements. He was no brute, no wild savage as the townsfolk often whispered about Apache warriors. He carried himself with purpose, discipline, restraint. Still, fear lingered in her veins. Fear of what he wanted, of what this strange path might lead to. She had survived so long by building walls around herself, and now those walls were cracking under the weight of silence, glances, and words she did not know how to answer. When Takoda finished with the horse, he stood and fastened a turquoise amulet around his neck. The bones and stones clicked softly against his chest. He looked at her again. "Today we move," he said. "There are eyes in these canyons." Evelyn's stomach clenched. Move where? To what end? She wanted to demand answers, but something in his voice stopped her. He wasn't threatening. He was warning. She gathered her shawl and followed as he mounted his horse, then helped her onto her mare. His hands brushed her waist briefly, firm yet careful, and the heat of his touch lingered long after he let go Dot as they rode out of the canyon. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind more than stone walls and ashes. She was leaving behind the woman she had been Dot and stepping into a story she did not yet understand. The desert stretched wide and merciless before them, its vastness broken only by scattered mesquite and jagged ridges of stone. Evelyn rode close behind Takoda, her mare's hooves crunching over dry earth, the sun already heavy though the morning was young. The silence between them was steady, almost like a third companion watchful, unyielding. She had grown used to the rhythm of her ranch, the neat predictability of chores, the quiet comfort of a roof overhead. Now the land itself felt like an enemy, each mile a reminder of how far she was from the life she knew. Dust clung to her skin, her lips cracked, and still Takoda pressed on, his back straight, his long black hair flowing like a banner in the wind. It was near midday when Evelyn noticed it, the faint glint of sunlight off metal far behind them. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks in the heat haze. But when the glint came again, sharper this time, her breath caught. "Takoda," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Someone's following." He did not turn, did not flinch. Only his hand shifted to the knife at his hip. "How many?" "2. Maybe 3, she said, straining to see through the shimmer of air. Takoda clicked his tongue, urging his horse into a faster gait. "Hold tight. Do not fall behind." Evelyn's heart thundered as they veered off the main trail, weaving through dry gullies and low shrubs. The desert sun beat down, sweat stinging her eyes, but fear drove her onward. The mare stumbled once, nearly unseating her, but Takoda's hand shot out, steadying her by the waist before pushing her forward again. The pursuers closed in. Evelyn could hear the faint pound of hooves now, the metallic jangle of bridles. She risked a glance back. 3 riders. Their hats low, rifles strapped across their backs, white men, not Apache. The kind who prowled the borderlands like wolves, looking for plunder and blood. Her mouth went dry. They weren't after cattle or land this time. They were after her. Takoda led them into a narrow ravine, its walls closing high and red around them. The air grew cooler in the shade, but the echo of hooves thundered louder. Suddenly, Takoda pulled his horse to a halt. He slid from the saddle in one smooth motion and handed Evelyn the reins. "Ride," he commanded. "Do not stop until you see the cottonwoods by the river." Evelyn stared at him, panic rising. "What about you?" He drew a bow from his back, stringing it with calm precision. His eyes burned with quiet fire. "I will delay them. Go." "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. She didn't want to leave him, not here, not facing 3 rifles alone. The thought of riding on and hearing gunfire behind her was unbearable, but Takoda's gaze held her, firm as stone. "Evelyn, trust me." Her chest ached. She bit her lip, then yanked her mare's reins hard, galloping forward into the ravine. The wind tore at her hair, branches scraped her arms, but she did not look back. She couldn't, yet even as she rode, his figure burned in her mind, tall, scarred, shirtless in the red canyon light, standing unflinching against men who wanted her as spoils. The sound came then, sharp and echoing, the twang of a bowstring, the crack of gunfire. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She urged her mare faster, praying, whispering Takoda's name as if it could shield him from bullets. At last, the ravine spilled into a wide plain. There, in the distance, shimmered the green crowns of cottonwoods beside a winding ribbon of water. Her mare slowed, panting, trembling, but Evelyn's heart would not rest. Every beat of silence was torture. Was he alive? Had he fallen? The idea tore at her more than she expected. She dismounted by the river, falling to her knees in the shade of the trees. She cupped the cold water in her hands, drinking greedily, but it did not ease the fire inside her chest. When she finally looked back toward the ravine, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would Takoda emerge from the shadows? Or would she be left alone in this wilderness, with nothing but his memory and the promise that still echoed in her ears, "You will not fear me tonight"? The river whispered softly through the cottonwoods, but to Evelyn it sounded like a cruel reminder of how small she was in this endless wilderness. She paced beneath the trees, wringing her hands until the skin reddened. Every time a branch cracked or a bird stirred, her head snapped up, hoping to see Takoda stride into view. But the ravine behind her remained silent. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breathing. I should have stayed. I should have fought beside him. The thought gnawed at her, though she knew she'd have been more burden than help. Still, guilt churned inside her like a storm. The sun crawled higher, shadows shrinking under the relentless heat. Evelyn knelt by the river, dipping her hands into the cool water, letting it run over her wrists. She caught her reflection in the current, her face dirt-streaked, eyes wide and hollow, hair tangled and falling loose. She looked less like the strong ranch widow she had always prided herself on being, and more like a frightened girl torn from the world she knew. A sound broke through her thoughts. The faint crunch of footsteps that her heart leapt. She turned and froze. Takoda emerged from the line of cottonwoods, walking slowly, deliberately. His long black hair clung damply to his shoulders, strands streaked with dust. His chest heaved with the strain of breath, muscles slick with sweat and streaked with blood. An arrow protruded shallowly from his side, and crimson stained the waistband of his deerskin trousers. Takoda! The name burst from her lips before she could stop it. She rushed forward, instinct shoving aside fear, and caught his arm as his knees buckled. His weight was immense, nearly dragging her down, but she braced herself against him, guiding him to the ground beneath the shade. 3 riders, he muttered, voice hoarse. 2 turned back. 1 will not rise again. Evelyn swallowed hard, torn between horror and relief. She pressed her hand against his bleeding side, feeling the hot stickiness of his blood seep through her fingers. You're hurt, she whispered. Takoda's dark eyes met hers. Even in pain, his gaze was steady, grounding. Not mortal, she wanted to believe him. But the sight of the arrow shaft made her stomach twist. Her husband's voice echoed in memory, an arrow left too long poisons the blood. Evelyn gritted her teeth. She would not lose another man to the violence of this land. Hold still, she said firmly, without waiting for his permission. She snapped the shaft, earning a hiss of pain from his lips. Then she gripped the base with shaking fingers and pulled. Takoda's hand clenched the earth, his muscles straining, but he did not cry out. The arrow slid free, and Evelyn tossed it aside, immediately pressing her shawl hard against the wound. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she worked, tearing strips from her skirt to bind the injury. The intimacy of the act, her hands pressed to his bare flesh, the heat of his body against hers, ignited something she tried desperately to smother. This was survival, nothing more. And yet, when she looked up and found his gaze fixed on her, it was not only survival that pulsed between them. You care, he said softly, almost in wonder. Evelyn's lips trembled. Don't mistake necessity for anything else. But even as she said it, her voice faltered. Because in truth, she did care. She cared far more than she should. For a long moment, they sat in silence, her hands pressed against him, his breath warming her cheek. The cottonwoods whispered above, leaves flickering in the sunlight like restless spirits. Finally, Takoda reached up. his fingers brushing lightly against her wrist, not restraining, not demanding, only acknowledging. "The desert is cruel," he murmured, "but it has given me you this night." The words struck her harder than the sight of his blood. She opened her mouth to protest, to remind him she was not his, but the words caught in her throat. Her heart betrayed her, beating wildly, whispering truths she was not ready to face. Instead, she tightened the bandage and leaned back, her breath unsteady. "Rest. You'll need your strength if more riders come." Takoda's eyes lingered on her, softening, and then he let them close, surrendering to exhaustion. Evelyn sat beside him, every nerve alive with fear and something she dared not name. She told herself she was watching over him out of duty, out of survival. But deep down, she knew it was more than that, because for the first time since Thomas's death, she was terrified of losing someone again. Evelyn jolted awake to the sharp crack of twigs outside the cave. Her breath caught in her throat. The fire had long since burned to embers, and the morning chill pressed against her skin like damp cloth. Takoda still lay beside her on the blankets, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, his long black hair spilling across his shoulders like a dark river. He looked both fearsome and fragile in sleep, the turquoise beads and feathers at his throat dulled by soot and blood. Another sound closer this time. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. She pressed a hand to Takoda's arm. "Wake up," she whispered, barely audible. His eyes opened instantly, sharp and alert despite the exhaustion clouding them. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then his hand slid to the knife at his belt. He pushed himself upright with a wince, muscles flexing as pain shot through his wound. "Stay behind me," he muttered, voice low, gravelly. Evelyn's instinct screamed to obey, but fear for him kept her rooted. She could see the strain in his face as he stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the cave's dim light. The sound outside grew louder, horses snorting, boots scraping stone. Evelyn's throat tightened. Whoever it was, they were hunting. Takoda moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate, pressing against the cave wall. He gestured once with 2 fingers' weight. Evelyn clutched the edge of the blanket, her nails digging into the wool. Then a figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. A cowboy hat low, rifle slung carelessly, peered inside. His eyes barely had time to widen before Takoda lunged. The clash was brutal and fast. Takoda's blade flashed, knocking the rifle aside. The man's shout echoed in the canyon as they grappled, bodies crashing against stone. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, frozen between terror and instinct to help. She saw another shadow outside, then a third. More men. "Run!" Takoda barked, voice sharp as steel, but she didn't move. Instead, Evelyn grabbed a jagged rock from the ground. When the second man rushed in, she swung with all her strength. The rock connected with his temple, and he crumpled with a groan. Her hand shook violently, breath ragged. She had never struck a man before. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Takoda dispatched the first cowboy with a swift, vicious strike, then spun to meet the next. His muscles strained, sweat running in rivulets down his chest as he fought, but his wound slowed him. Evelyn saw his knees buckle briefly. Panic surged in her. Without thinking, she seized the fallen rifle. It was heavy, awkward, but she lifted it, pointing it toward the cave mouth. The third man froze, eyes flicking between her and Takoda. Evelyn's finger trembled against the trigger. "Go," she choked out, her voice breaking. For a moment, the man hesitated. Then, cursing, he turned and bolted back toward the canyon, his footsteps retreating into the morning. Silence settled, broken only by Takoda's harsh breathing. Evelyn lowered the rifle, her arm shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Takoda leaned against the wall, sweat streaking his face. He looked at her, not with anger, not with scorn, but something deeper. something that unsettled her more than the fight itself. "You did not run," he said, voice rough. Evelyn's lips parted. She wanted to speak, to explain, but words failed. She sank to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly near his wound. "I couldn't," she whispered. For a long moment they sat in silence. The world outside seemed to fade, replaced by the soft drip of water on stone and the scent of smoke clinging to their clothes. Finally, Takoda reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of her hair from her face. His hand lingered, warm against her cheek. His dark eyes held hers, searching, unyielding. "You are stronger than you think," he murmured. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had never heard words like that, not from her late husband, not from anyone. The heat in Takoda's gaze both frightened and drew her in. She swallowed hard, torn between instinct to pull away and the strange, burning need to stay. The cave felt smaller, the air heavy. Beyond the fear and exhaustion, something undeniable simmered between them, dangerous and tender all at once, and in that charged silence, Evelyn realized the truth she hadn't dared admit, not even to herself. She no longer feared only the men outside. She feared what was happening inside her heart. The cave still smelled of blood and smoke when Evelyn finally lowered the rifle to the ground. Her hands trembled as though the weight of everything she had done, all the fear, the strike with the stone, the threat she had shouted with a gun in her hands, settled on her shoulders at once. She sank back against the wall, her body weak with exhaustion. Takoda, though wounded and pale, did not rest. His dark eyes flicked to the cave's entrance, sharp and unblinking. He listened, every muscle taut, as though he could sense the desert itself breathing. His long black hair clung damp to his shoulders, the turquoise beads and feathers swaying with the faint breeze creeping into the cave. "More will come," he murmured, voice low and steady. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She wanted to beg him to sit, to let her bind his wound properly, to promise he would not move again. But one look at his scarred, powerful frame, still standing between her and danger, told her the truth. He would fight until there was nothing left in him. "I can't lose you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, her voice trembling like a confession. His head turned sharply, eyes locking with hers. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than any gunshot. "You fear me," Takoda said at last. Not a question, but a statement. Evelyn's throat ached. She wanted to deny it, but her voice betrayed her honesty. "I did. Maybe I still do. But not the way I used to." Something in his gaze softened then, like embers glowing beneath ash. He crouched slowly, wincing from his wound, until his face was level with hers. The firelight touched the planes of his scarred chest, highlighting the strength etched into every line of muscle, every mark of survival. When the night came, "I said I would be gentle," he whispered, his voice hushed but fierce with meaning. "Gentle does not mean weak," Evelyn swallowed, her pulse quickening. The way he looked at her was unlike anything she had ever known, not as a possession, not as a fragile woman to protect, but as someone who had fought beside him, someone who mattered. Before she could answer, the echo of hooves thundered outside. Shadows shifted across the canyon walls. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "They've found us." Takoda pressed a hand to his side, blood still seeping, and rose to his full, imposing height. He looked down at her, his face carved from resolve. "If I fall, you take the horse. Ride north until the river bends twice. Do not look back." "No." Evelyn shook her head violently, her chest heaving. "Don't you dare ask me to leave you." The warrior's expression flickered, just once with something she had never expected to see, vulnerability. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her jaw, then sliding back into her hair. His touch was rough, yet tender, carrying all the words he could not speak. "You are fire," he whispered. "You burned fear into strength. Outside, voices barked commands, boots scattering on rock. Evelyn's heart pounded like a drum. She could feel time slipping away, each second pulling them closer to the inevitable clash. And in that fleeting moment before the storm broke, she did something reckless. She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was fierce, desperate, full of all the fear, fury, and longing that had carried them through fire and blood. His hand tightened in her hair, his chest heaving against hers, answering her without words. When she pulled back, her voice trembled but carried steel. Then we burned together. Takoda's eyes blazed with pride, with something deeper, something that promised she would never be alone again. The cowboys' voices drew closer, rifles clattering. Takoda took his place at the mouth of the cave, the warrior once more, his silhouette broad and unyielding. Evelyn moved beside him, rifle clutched tight, her torn dress whipping in the desert wind. They stood together, shadows against the rising sun. Two unlikely souls bound not by fear, but by fire. And as the first figure appeared in the canyon light, Evelyn knew, whatever happened next, she would no longer run. She had already chosen her place at his side.